We've also done some work recently looking with some organic acid applications on the feed. Going in there, putting some salmonella in there. I think we're usually getting about 5 or 6 log when we add in the feed. So that's probably a little unrealistic for the real world, but we're able to see, a couple log reduction, applying these different organic acid treatments and everything, which is, it's promising because I think in the real world there, you're probably not getting 5 or 6 log into in a batch of feed, hopefully.
Welcome to the Feed Science Podcast. I'm Adam Farnells, coming from North Carolina State University's Animal Food Manufacturing program. And on behalf of Wisenetics, thanks for joining us today. Our guest on this episode of the podcast is Tim Boltz. Tim is an assistant professor at Mississippi State University in the Poultry Science Department there. Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Adam. So yeah, I'm a new assistant, I guess not new assistant professor here. I've been here a little over a couple of years now. It's wild to think about, how time's flying. But I've been here at the department a couple of years now. Kind of started off, never thought I'd really end up here in Mississippi. I'm originally from Cheyenne, Wyoming, kind of bounced around, got my degrees out there in West Virginia. I worked a lot with Dr. Boltz for my degrees. A couple of years later, after that was done, Mississippi was looking for, an assistant professor. Real general, came down here. I teach currently the Poultry Nutrition course. I also teach broiler production. We've kind of had some changes in faculty, so I've been taking over the anatomy physiology class, it's fun. I'm learning some stuff again too. It's been good. And then trying to get, we're down here. We're trying to get a feed mill going down in Mississippi State, kind of like you guys up there. So I've been working on that, trying to think about curriculum and whatnot that we can hopefully implement into that one once that starts getting built up and going.
Absolutely. So yeah, that we've all got a kind of some shared interest there on kind of that impact of animal feed manufacturing on eventual production parameters at the bird, whether that be performance, safety, whatever it is. And I know that area of the feed safety and some of the hygiene and things that go to that were something that you spent a fair amount of time on in your degrees, and to my understanding is something you still are kind of focusing on there as part of your program, in addition to all the teaching load, expected or unexpected, that you just covered.
Yeah, so I've been working on that. Yet, as you said, my graduate degrees were a lot kind of feed hygiene. When I started there at West Virginia University, we had just got the feed mill there renovated. We had got a hygienizer, so I know a lot of the university feed mills have those, and we've just gotten one. Did a lot of work with that, looking at some surrogate organisms, Enterococcus faecium specifically, kind of more salmonella based. Looking at that, trying to see some reduction in that. We did some work, our thermally aggressive, as you want to call it, 80 degrees Celsius, 30 seconds with about a minute Fahrenheit, or 45 seconds in the hygienizer there, seeing how that would reduce, a bacterial population. We saw that they gave us about a 4 log reduction, whereas, our standard condition, which was a little less, about 70 degrees Celsius, 15 seconds conditioning time, and no hygienizer, we had about a 3 log reduction. Did that. I did some other stuff kind of in the lab. I use real salmonella, and working with pathogens like salmonellas, it's kind of hard to get BSL-2 facilities, especially a feed mill. It's a lot of undertaking. So I did a lot of lab-based stuff, kind of using a water bath. It's maybe not the most applicable there in the sense of, there was no steam injection, moisture, and that heat transfer that way. But we saw some good work looking at that. We looked at a typhimurium, different time and temperature combos, kind of getting some food safety stuff, some D and Z values, thermal death times and temperature changes we needed to, kind of see the reduction we would want. Kind of looking with that, starting here in Mississippi, kind of continue with that as well. I did some similar stuff with a water bath using some E. coli's, but a couple strains. I tried to find a suitable BSL-1 surrogate for thermal inactivation work, and then a couple Apex, thinking those get introduced to a flock, they can cause some issues. Looking at that, we've also done some work recently looking with some organic acid applications on the feed. That's been kind of neat, applying that, going out there again. So we do that. We have a BSL-2 facility here on our farm that we can just bring a mixer in. We haven't really pelleted anything. It's just been more of a mash application for now.
Sure.
But going in there, putting some salmonella in there. Usually, I think we're usually getting about 5 or 6 log when we add in the feed. So that's probably a little unrealistic for the real world. But we're able to see a couple log reduction. Applying these different organic acid treatments and everything, which is and what's promising because I think in the real world there you're probably not getting 5 or 6 log into in a batch of feed. Hopefully, that's just straight contamination. So I mean, if you get a couple log on a bad batch and you apply one of these treatments there, should knock it down to a pretty safe level. I'd say almost eradicated.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit from a practical perspective, right? So as you mentioned, there's ways that we can do this in kind of standard manufacturing, standard conditioning and pelleting and things like that. There's obviously ways that we can do it with even extended manufacturing using something like a hygienizer, post pelleting, hold and retention at heat, all kinds of stuff that's been out there and experimented with and tried. We also have as you mentioned, the organic acids and other types of products, formaldehydes and that sort of thing, which certainly work in many cases very, very well, have their own issues with, coming into the mill and safety that goes along with them and, mostly worker safety. I mean by that, and making sure that everything is nice and tight and we're not having fumes and all that other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we've got all that. We know that it's something we can do, right? We also know that generally speaking, we don't have huge amounts of, at least scientific data, that there are major issues with things like Salmonella, E. coli just running rampant through our feed systems and out in the barns and everything else. So when we talk about this from a practical standpoint, what's kind of the selling point for, okay, I know that you don't think you've got major problems out there, and the data was suggested, or we'd have animals getting sick all the time and other problems like that. But this is something to consider investing in. Like, what's the idea there of why this is worth learning about and looking into, if there's not an absolute precise problem right at this moment?
I think it's kind of, yeah, it's not a super big problem right now, but kind of the food safety, the FSMA back in 2011 kind of tightened everything up a little bit. I think trying to be a little bit more proactive instead of reactive. So trying to nip it in the bud before anything happens. So if we, sometimes you might get a batch of corn or something that's whatever reason really contaminated with a pathogen. Other times you may not. I think just kind of these application, the conditioning is a real simple way to do it. Everybody that pellets, they can usually adjust their conditioning times and temperatures, within limit or within reason, excuse me. So I mean that's pretty simple. I think just kind of being proactive here is the most beneficial way of that. Like you're saying, there was a really, really rampant. We see a lot more illnesses, but we're not. I think kind of the food safety there too. The thought of that is if there's less chance of salmonella or serotype, whatever it may be, getting into those birds, it's less likely that you may find in the plant. I mean that there could be another vector bringing it in. Houses, a rodent or a worker stepping in, droppings outside and coming in may still bring that in. But I think that feed aspect side is something just kind of trying to be a little bit proactive. I wouldn't say easy, it's a low hanging fruit kind of, it's a little bit easier to think about how to do that, implement that, at the feed side before it goes out.
How do you think it might apply from the standpoint of, okay, we know that, as we just talked about, we know that it might not be that you are absolutely needing to, for various different reasons, the serotypes that are there aren't of concern. We're not having huge problems, everything else. An absolute thing there. But there may be other things that are coming in the future that are also biologic, but aren't maybe bacteria, that you might want to know and have some data and have some tools in place in order to, through manufacturing and or the ingredient addition, be able to address, as considering some of the like viral concerns and things we have like that. Is there a good kind of allegory there from, yes, we're talking mostly about bacteria because that's what we can test, but some of this stuff is maybe possibly going to be advantageous if we had to control for something else too?
I think, yeah, like you're saying, I think this kind of gives us a baseline, a starting point that, if AI for some reason we start to suspect it's coming in through corn or another ingredient, maybe we need to think of that through thermally processing that more to nip that in the bud before it gets into a house, and affects a bird or a flock. I think K-State's done a lot of work with the African swine fever, looking into that. That's an issue more for the pork or the pork side, the swine side, but again, that's valuable data, that we can still go look at too, for that virus type aspect, because yeah, big viruses for poultry for me. I'm thinking, AI.
I was going to say, I was going to say, I mean, I think that that's part of the discussion because, and as we, potentially thinking about the audience here and going, I mean, look, we don't have these big problems. And I would say, hey, I completely agree. I don't necessarily, I'm not going to sit there and say, hey, all of you need to go put in this extended conditioning and all of you need to go put in these systems because, there's a huge feed safety problem that you need to address right now. I would tend to agree with that. I don't think the data supports that that's an issue. But the idea of, but wouldn't you like to know what the possibilities are should it become an issue is a good reason to pay attention to the research and for the research to be done. So, hey, hopefully we never need to use these tools. But boy, we'd sure like to know what works and what doesn't and how to use them if we need them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, like we have them. They're a tool in the toolbox. There, we have them. We understand what they, their uses. How to efficiently use them. For one, God knows if something happens, we can then apply it and try to manage it. I think too, kind of going back, that's more being that proactive side. Instead of like, oh hey, we need to. There's some crazy new virus coming in all the corn. We need to eradicate. How do we do that? We already have. Maybe not for that specific whatever disease, but we have a starting point there.
Yeah, we know how to use the equipment if we had to. Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely. And then of course we also know that there are segments of our industry, right? Especially on the poultry side, but also on other parts of food animal that are very concerned with certain parts of their production process where they do want to send incredibly hygienic feed because their appetite for risk for something like grandparent stock if you're a breeder company, right, where it's like my appetite for risk of them getting anything is zero. And so
yeah,
we know that we do have some segments where it's like no, we don't necessarily think that this is a major problem, but it's a, as you said, it's a good enough tool for a decent enough ROI that we're going to use it so that we don't even have to worry about it ever being a problem.
yeah. Get rid of that risk completely. Yeah, you don't want to get whatever salmonella into that breeder flock. You don't want that, so you're gonna treat everything the fullest extent you can just to nip that in the bud before. I agree with that.
Again, my guest today is Tim Boltz. Tim is an assistant professor at Mississippi State in the Poultry Science Department there. I think another interesting thing, though, to also talk about because I know you guys, I know this was some of your work, and then you guys have continued some of it, and then I know that we've got some other folks that were part of your lab and other labs, and that are now faculty colleagues at other institutions and our own. Another thing I think that's always interesting in this conversation is what else happens when we try to do some of that hygiene, right? And okay, if I'm going to put in some of these organic acids or other types of things that are literally there to potentially break down things that shouldn't be there, what happens when I want to put in some of these really expensive additives, or when I want to do this extended conditioning? That's great, and maybe it has created this feed safety thing, but is there any impact on nutrition of things that don't respond all that well to heat and pressure? So I know you guys did some work on that, and that's still something that we talk about. So if you wouldn't mind kind of talking about what some of the push pull there is of, okay, we can do this, but you better consider this if you're going to do it.
So yeah, I mean that's a good point. Dr. Moore's always kind of talked about a three-legged stool kind of approach to that. Up top there, that's your the stool is like your pellets, everything like that, and then your legs, are nutrient availability, pellet quality, and you think feed hygiene. So you really crank up the heat there, extended times, everything like that. Speaking for that side, you might get really great feed hygiene. You can probably get some decent pellet quality as well. You can put more moisture in there and get that. But that can really jack up your nutrient availability. I know I can't remember the exact amount, but towards the end of my degree there, or my time there, we were working on some work, and we saw that you need, I think it's about a 10% increase in lysine there,
Hmm.
the meat for that, because that lysine is going to be heat liable. You're really cranking it through there, hygienizer temps, and hygienizer for 6 minutes, everything like that. It's really going to degrade that. So that's a thought there that for these companies, you're going to have to really over formulate to accommodate that, which can get a little costly. Your vitamins and minerals, for the most part, from what I gathered over the years and understand, those premixes are usually pretty in the safe. Yeah, they're high, but they're in a safe range, so you're pretty good. But that might be something as well. You might start to see some deficiencies in that aspect. In more of a breeder flock situation, if you really are cooking that feed there. Speaking on the organic acid side, I have that's something that's interesting that I haven't thought about. Kind of thinking about that. How does that really impact your digestibility of amino acids, or does it affect minerals or something somehow in there? Maybe not, but putting that in the biological system of that bird, just seeing how that would go. That's an interesting approach that I hadn't really thought about for those organic acids.
We've had people, ask over the years, and I know that various different companies have done some of these trials and looked at, if I'm going to use some of these, especially liquid additives that are being put in for like safety and control, if I have maybe an enzyme, and maybe that enzyme is something that is, we're working on getting it more heat tolerant. It's not as heat tolerant as we like for conditioning. Well, also, is it tolerant to me adding something like this that is literally meant to go and find a biologic protein and take it apart so that it can't function anymore, like a salmonella, right? And that's one of the things that it's doing. Well, what could it do to something like an enzyme in the same idea? So I think it's what makes some of what we do, when we look at these comparisons between like the feed manufacturing and then the animal performance, and we look at them together. And I think it makes it so interesting from the standpoint of how many variables there are. And there's only a few things out there where it's like, oh, if we do this, it's going to be better for the feed mill, the birds, everything. But the vast majority of the decisions we make end up being this at the expense of that. And which am I going to do, and how do I assign, a return on investment to that, a cost to that? Where does it fall in my profits? And I think trying to teach everybody from the students to the folks in the industry about that is really important. And again, I know you guys have been doing a lot of work at Mississippi State on feed quality, and as it moves through the barns and all this other kind of stuff. And I know, we've got colleagues up at Penn State that are doing that too. All, again, coming out of some of the same ideas of, we can do this, but then this happens, and then which is more important. So I don't know what other kind of work you guys might be doing down there that also kind of goes along with those same ideas of that push pull idea of how we tie the feed and the nutrition together.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I mean, mostly for me right now, trying to figure everything out. I've just been working on that feed hygiene aspect, but like you were saying though, there's so much complexities there that you don't think about. Like you put in organic gas in there, will that affect an enzyme that you put, a phytase? And, there's a lot of work out there, thermal stability. That, I mean, you've probably done that. I've dealt with that over the years. Thermal stability of phytases, we got those spot on. But yeah, like those organic acids, how does that affect, something else? I'm trying to think, some other work down here. We've just been doing. I know Dr. Walmsley does a lot. She did a lot with more nutrient digestibility, or coefficients or I can't think right now, requirements there, excuse me, requirements. I know she did a lot with that, which that again too, with her feed quality, her feed form quality, everything like that. That research is very vital there. You might need have a higher requirement if you're cooking it really well.
Yeah, I think again, I think that's where a lot of these interesting conversations come from, are how those things actually end up tying together, and then having folks that understand the the entire chain of what's going on. And we see a lot of issues, I think, in our industry of, we're over here and we're making feed, and we're over here and we're designing nutrition, and we're over here on the veterinary side looking at the bird, or the pig or the cow or whatever it is, whatever food animal we're talking about. And over here, we got someone dealing with transportation, and the processing is over here. And we forget sometimes just how much all this can actually interact with each other, and how one small change over here can have this, literal like butterfly effect over here on performance and on the bottom line and everything else. And so I think there's all these interesting interactions for us to consider as the folks that are doing, research and education and outreach in this space.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Because thinking about feed sanitation, going with that. I mean, if you slow it down, you do a lot of retention time, you might get a really good product. But then throughput's a major thing there for feed mills, for companies. You don't want hungry birds. You gotta meet a limit there, or a quota. But if you slow it down, you have to work longer. There's just a lot of variables there that if you adjust it, it's going to mess up something on the other another part of the chain there. It's just sometimes people don't think of that. They're like,
Yeah.
slowing it down sounds easy enough, but you think about, hey, later on down the chain, it may not, be simple enough.
Right. I can slow down the production rate, increase your conditioning temperature, put a real nice big thick pellet die on there. I'll make you a beautiful pellet. Now, how much of your nutrition is left? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
Bag enzyme that we bought that was $800 every time we dump it in the micro bin over there. Yeah, it's only about 20% there now because we just beat the heck out of it. But you asked for good pellets, so I gave you good pellets. Well, at some point you shouldn't have asked for that good of a pellet because you hurt yourself over here. And I think that goes into that feed hygiene discussion really, really nicely, because most of the stuff we're going to do to create really tight feed hygiene isn't good for a lot of the other stuff that we're trying to give the bird nutritionally.
it's very contradictory there. You can get great pellet, great feed hygiene, but then nutritional content, the quality of it might be down the drain there. Just something that it's a delicate balancing act there to just maintain all that in a three-legged stool approach, maintain it all equal legs.
Yep.
A lot.
Yep. And it might be better if the stool's a little shorter than trying to make it taller. It might be like, this is as tall as the stool gets. If we try to make it any taller, the thing's going to tip over
Yeah.
because one of those legs ain't going to keep up. That's a really good way to look at it.
It's time for our famous three.
Well, I've enjoyed our conversation here, our quick conversation on this. Before we do close it out, though, I'm from your perspective, if folks in the industry they're listening to stuff like this and they're thinking, okay, these are some interesting concepts. These are things I'd like to learn more about. In your experience, what have you found have been good places to go learn more about these kinds of things? If someone came to you and said, if I want to learn more about this, you would send them where?
I mean, I'm a fan. I do a lot with the Journal of Applied Poultry Research, Poultry Science. Those two journals, I think they're very well rounded in that. There's the Feed Science Technology Journal as well. I've looked into that. That's taught me a lot. I think too, just trying to find people out there that know more than you. I mean, I am no expert by any means. But talk with Dr. Mortz. I work a lot with a food microbiologist as well in grad school. Kind of people like that, different. Trained a little differently, but the same concept. You can kind of apply to the feed science and everything. And I think just trying to go out there and find other people that know more or have a different a view on that area that can really expand it a lot for you as well.
That's always a great point. I think the resources that you mentioned there, that the different journals are excellent. You go and you can kind of look for the keywords of the things you're interested in. All those are becoming open access now. So where it used to be, you had to have access to a university library or something like that, or a username. Not so much anymore, which is great for everyone. But I think your other point is really well taken too. Of hey, go find somebody that knows more, but also don't assume that person that knows more is only going to be somebody in this one very specific area. I'm going to know more about this one particular thing on salmonella in feed. Okay, cool. Well, there's 4 experts that would be considered the salmonella in feed kind of person, right?
Mhm.
But there's tons of micro folks around that do other stuff. And if you want to learn something about a micro problem, there's probably somebody over here in a plant or at a university or something that can talk to you all day about how microorganisms work. And then you can maybe extrapolate from there. Oh, if I know that, then based on the process we're doing over here, this is where contamination could happen, or this is where control could happen, or recontamination could happen based on something I learned. Don't have to limit yourself to that, like, very, very specific topic in some cases.
Yeah, you don't need to. I mean, there's that one person out there who knows it all, but there's also 30 other people that may not be that well versed in that specific, very narrow topic, but
they know a piece.
Yeah, like they're kind of like the looking above the trees type situation there. You get the whole picture there.
That's a great point. My guest today in what has felt like a very quick but informative 25 minutes is Dr. Tim Boltz. Dr. Boltz is an assistant professor in the Poultry Science Department at Mississippi State University. Tim, thanks very much. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
Once again, I'm Adam Farrell coming to you from NC State, and on behalf of Wise Genetics, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you the next time.